whakataka te hau ki te toka, whakataka te hau ki te uru. Kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hi aki ana te atakura, he tio, he hoka, he hauhu, ti hei mauriora. Tēnā koutou. Koutou kua tai mai i tēnei pō. Te pō te tino ua ua. Te tohu o tāwhiri mātea. Nau mai tauti mai, I raro te maru o tēnei whare a tāhua tūranga. Koutou kua whetūrangi tia. Moi mai, oki mai. Rātou kia rātou, tātou kia tātou. Kei te mihi kia koutou ngā kai mahi o te pō, Jessica. Tēnā koe e hoa. Me te whānui I te atamira, toku whanauka Craig, te tohunga o te ngāhere, Hullen, me te puti a tāhua, Dai. Tēnā koe, tēnā koutou. Kei te mihi kia koutou. Tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora, ladies and gentlemen, my name's Joseph Hullen. I have the immense privilege of opening this evening and setting the tone for the discussion and embracing your urban wild. I live at Kaiapoi. I was born and raised at Tūāhuriri, and my mum and dad bought a house in Kaiapoi. And if you go down Whitefield Street today and you look at my dad's garden, you see lawn, and a little bit later on you'll see potatoes, cucumbers, tomatoes, and the odd shrub. If you have a look at my place in Kinnersley Street, my backyard looks a little bit like Craig's. There's probably about 15 kōwhai trees, half a dozen harakeke, 3 or 4 kōtukutukus, they're our native tree fuchsia, and several lancewoods, horoeka, pseudopanixes. I embrace the urban wild because I have a long-term aspiration. I'm currently a trustee at Te Kohaka Tūhaitara that manages the coastal wetland park between the Rakahuri and the Waimakariri rivers and is centred on Woodian Beach and Tūtaipatu Lagoon. I know that over at Hinematua Reserve there's a population of tui, and I know that from time to time they overwinter in the Te Moana bush on Mount Cass. And from time to time, they stop off in Te Kohaka Tūhaitara and they sing. And our General Manager, Greg Burns, takes great delight in posting live on Facebook. Great day in this office. The many kōwhai trees that I've planted in my backyard are there for a purpose. And that's to attract those tuis that transit between Hinewai and Te Moana bush. Native species don't just... Native tree species, native vegetation species, mahinga kai, don't just provide food. They actually provide mana for the soul. Because the sound of those birds is infinitely more acceptable than the sound of urban traffic. When my mum and dad built the house at Kaiapoi, we were surrounded by paddocks. Just a little way distant was the Ahoka Swamp, or Ohoka Swamp, and a little bit further beyond that was the Fernside Swamp, and then a little bit further up the country was the Oxford Swamp. And in rain events like today, those swamps held water and slowly released it downstream. Not just a stormwater measure, they were actually a larder. Those swamps, I would wager, would supply more calories per hectare with no effort than any intensively farmed land. Recently I've been looking with interest at the talk about housing intensification. Everybody wants a quarter-acre section like me at Kaiapoi, surrounded by kōwhai trees and harakeke. The reality of that is, if everybody gets what they want, a quarter-acre section, won't be too many generations before there'll be a residential subdivision from the coast to the Alps. At the moment, there's an application to develop out at Ōhuka, 700 houses. Those 700 houses will take away more diversity. Coming back into the city, so housing intensification is a necessary evil. It's how we provide the green space that services those people in their housing that's important. Colin likely will talk to you later on about it's important to have diversity. Sometimes I actually think that the diversity needs to be a block of one species. So I have several different types of kōwhai, so they flower continually over a longer period of time than just one species. That means if those tui turn up in August instead of July, when my first kōwhai are flowering, they're still going to get a feed. And likewise, I think embracing the urban wild, we need to do some of these things. So how about clumping various species or various cultivars of harakeke? They flower at different times, they provide nectar, they provide a food source. They're relatively easy to maintain, and they have an interesting form about them. How about clumping together, say, the kōwhais that I was talking about, or some coprosmas? Once again, they have varying types of berries, varying types of cultivars of coprosma have berries that are available at different times of the year, providing food. Becoming familiar with our natives inspires people to actually get their fingers dirty and help to maintain their garden. And before you know it, you could actually invest some effort in scattering perhaps some lettuce seeds underneath, some silver beet, some radishes, some of those things that you can actually eat as well. And then you ingrain in your children a bit of an ethic of caring for the land and growing some stuff. I often stand in these kind of forums bleating on about how our mātauranga Māori dictates the way we conducted ourselves in our life and the way we managed our resources. There's a good reason for that. It's ingrained in us over 10,000 years of voyaging around the Pacific. Aotearoa, the last archipelago to be populated by Polynesians. So for about 10,000 years, Craig and I's relations have been hopping into Waka and paddling off into the unknown with a finite amount of food and the hope that their science and their navigation skill will get them to a homeland. And by utilising their knowledge of the stars to anchor the seasons in a calendar that they understood, they were then able to prosper in each new homeland they came to. Even the coldest, most temperate archipelago in Polynesia. Western science is said to be superior to mātauranga Māori. Mātauranga Māori has dictated and shaped me into doing the things that I do. Western science has told us since I was a boy at Xavier College and the I Care movement that what we're doing to the earth is not sustainable, that it will be the death of us all. The greatness that is Western science in 50 years has yet to be able to change the way we do things, the way we conduct ourselves in our environment. That's the challenge. We have to stop, we have to change, and we have to do it fast, because if we don't, I believe that rather than planting kōwhais and harakekes and lettuces and silver beets around their houses, a couple of generations' time, children might as well start planting kelp. Kapa. Let's change today. Let's start to impact that change and ripple it down through our children. Let's grasp hold of the naitahu whakatauki mō tātou a mō kauri a muri ake nei, not just for us, but our children and their children and their children who come after us. Kia ora.
Kia ora, ngā mihi, Joseph. Thank you for opening this evening by grounding us in your perspective and in the perspective of mana whenua. Those are really important words for us to take in. You might want to sit down for a bit, Angus, it's my turn. Tēnā koutou. Ki te mana whenua o tini takiwā nai Tūāhuriri, ki te mihi, ki te mihi, ki te mihi. Ko Jessica Halliday tōku ingoa, ko ahau te kai whakahaere o te Pūtahi, Centre for Architecture and City Making. Kia ora tātou katoa. It's my pleasure as the director of Te Pūtahi to welcome you all, to those in the room and to those joining us online, to Embracing the Urban Wild, which is the first event in the 2022 edition of Christchurch Conversations towards 2030. This speaker series started last year with 5 events, which you can watch on YouTube if you want to, and I would encourage you to. They all looked at different urban changes, these changes that Joseph talked about, that we need to make to reach our city's emission goals by the year 2030. This year we pick up the conversation again and start by considering the ways in which climate change will affect human and more than human species in this city, and how we can work together in this place to address the greatest challenge we have ever faced. Before we begin, there are 2 groups of organisations and people who've made today's event possible and that we at Te Pūtahi would very much like to thank. Firstly, our supporters and partners, our series partner, the Christchurch City Council, and our research partner, the Urban Wellbeing Ngā Kaina Ora thread of better homes, towns and cities, one of the national science challenges. Secondly, a huge, great thanks to this amazing array of knowledgeable speakers who are appearing tonight. Thank you all for accepting our invitation to speak, to challenge us, and to help us better understand the potential for this place to embrace wildness within the city's boundaries. So how is tonight going to roll? Well, we have a series of speakers, and you can tell who the first one is. The second one, after Joseph, and a panel discussion. And during the panel discussion, there'll be room for a few questions from the floor and online. There have been some last-minute changes to the speakers thanks to COVID and flooding. So thank you for your understanding as we navigate this. You can ask questions of the panel tonight by texting your question to 020 411 09415. This slide will be on the screen during that opportunity. That's for you in the room. If you're joining us online, you can ask a question in the chat on YouTube, and the team will relay all those questions and they'll come through me to the panel. So I have to navigate phones and messages and pass them on to the panel. This is to allow us to avoid duplication and to avoid passing a mic during a pandemic. It's a packed program, so we'll be keeping introductions as snappy as we can. If you hear a soothing chime towards the end of the presentations, that's our speaker's 1 minute mark. But now quickly, just for some scene setting of Te Pūtahi's own. Why are we doing this? Well, recently we've all read those headlines about how climate change is already affecting New Zealand's biodiversity and native species, about the mass deaths of korora, the little blue penguins in Northland last month. An investigation showed that those hundreds and hundreds of those birds, they starved to death, and not because of overfishing, rather because climate change is creating waters too warm for the fish that they feed on. Data released last year saw the highest global ocean temperatures in recorded history. We also saw the headlines about the bleaching of sponges in Fiordland, marine sponges, also attributed to warming oceans. So what does this decline in marine biodiversity have to do with this place? As we'll learn tonight, thank you Angus, it's not just at both ends of the country or in marine environments that plants, animals and ecosystems are threatened by climate change. It's happening here too. So what do we do about this? Of course, we have to accelerate our collective action to mitigate climate change, to reduce emissions, to give up fossil fuels. We also have to do more than that, and I thank you, Joseph, again for telling us what else we have to do. We need to open our imaginations, we need to evolve or maybe devolve our thinking and expand our experiences of how we relate to and think about this living world. We've called tonight's event Embracing the Urban Wild because one of the root causes of climate change is the way we've separated ourselves from the rest of the natural world, both conceptually, in that we keep seeing nature as something that's distinct from ourselves rather than a living system that humans are part of. And physically, we've also done that in our urban settlements. We've removed ourselves from so much of the natural world. So tonight, thanks to our speakers, we'd like to explore why, how and where Ōtautahi Christchurch can become a more wild place. And so I would like now to hand over to our second speaker, Professor Angus McIntosh, who's going to talk about how the climate crisis affects biodiversity here. Please welcome him.
Tēnā koutou katoa, e te mana whenua Ngāi Tūāhuriri, tēnā koutou. It's great to be here. Thank you for coming out on what is a wonderfully wet night. I'm saying that as a freshwater ecologist because that's what I mostly do, but I've been asked to talk about biodiversity in general. And tēnā koe, Joseph, and you're absolutely right that people change things. And so my role here is to try and give you some ideas, some more ideas, and that's what I'm going to try and do. This is a climate model. I'm not going to try and explain it greatly, and I'm not a climate scientist, but the things that they tell us are scary, and they're not just about warming. You probably, I was going to do a bit of a poll thinking about, what do you think the most or the worst consequences of climate warming are? And I was expecting that most people might say, well, it's going to get warmer. But the reality is that it's going to change a lot in a lot of different directions. And so this model here, which is a downscale global model, has some information on what's going to happen in Canterbury. And we might see a mean increase in 0.9, so almost a degree Celsius, a loss of about 1% of precipitation by 2040, something like that, reduction in rainfall. But the really scary part is that there's this variation here. We could go up to 2 degrees, and we could go from minus 10% in rainfall to plus 9%. So that variability is huge, right? That's massive. And we're experiencing that today. And I'm enjoying the rain because, gosh, do we need to have our groundwater replenished and we need all that snowpack and those sorts of things. But it's going to get more variable. And so the variability, I think, is probably the biggest challenge for our biota. It's been said that Aotearoa is incredibly variable and our biota, are pretty used to that. And that's true to a certain extent, but they can't do everything. And so I want to think about what the consequences of that might be, some insights and what we can do in management. I'm going to talk about 3 main things. I want to talk about koaro, Canterbury mudfish, first. Critically endangered, lives entirely off the conservation estate on the Canterbury Plains. So our farmers and others are kaitiaki of this fish, and it's incredibly resilient. They can withstand weeks on end out of water as long as it's damp. They can withstand very low oxygen levels in the water. They can withstand very high temperatures, but they cannot do it for months on end. They can't do it for months on end. So, this whole idea that sort of generalist kind of lifestyle and wide environmental tolerances are not bomb-proof. And so we've been looking at what mudfish do on the plains. This is work from Chris Meyer And a big question's been here is, should we put a canopy over the streams that these fish are in? Because a lot of the streams that are in at the moment don't have a vegetated canopy. And if you have a look, as canopy goes up, the relative abundance of large mudfish adults increases. Large mudfish what does a canopy do? Why might a canopy be useful? Well, it's kind of, it's mudfish takeout bar. There's lots of invertebrates and things which fall from the canopy, and the mudfish eat them. And as drying intensity increases, mudfish abundance goes down. So, trees are good, drying bad. But there's a real kicker in this relationship, and it is that it depends on what sort of tree that you have. Because if it's willows, then it makes the drying worse. And so that ends up being a really bad thing, because willows are thirsty, right? They take up lots of water. They use that water in photosynthesis. Almost any other sort of tree works. Almost any other sort of tree. Hawthorn, whatever, weeds. Colin will probably hate me for saying this, but as long as there's a canopy over the stream that keeps the temperature down, surprise food, mudfish do better as long as it's not willows, because they suck all the water away. So, invasive willows deliver food and cover, but they intensify drying. We really need to engineer these habitats, and there's no other better example of mudfish habitat engineering than what they're doing at Tūhaitara, Te Kohaka, or Tūhaitara that Joseph has already talked about. And so if you haven't been there, go out this weekend, have a walk around, have a look at the Botur. They've got some wonderful new interpretation panels, and that iwi that are leading the world in restoration in this respect. They've been making mudfish habitats which make resilient fish populations given what the climate's throwing at us at the moment. Second thing I want to talk about, and actually I think one of the people who might have been responsible for collecting this data is in the audience, or Julia, I'm not sure where you are now, Julia, but anyway, this is a piece of video collected from the Biology 378 conservation class, not too far from here, up on the Port Hills at the Summit Road Society's Omuhu Bush Reserve. If you know your rats, you'll know that it's got a long tail and the ears don't flip over, so it's, what sort of rat is it? Don't listen to that. Shiprat, it's a shiprat. Good, yeah, long tail, yeah. Good. It's been said that you're probably, when you're living in an urban space, you're probably not more than 20 or 30 metres from a rat. I'm not sure which of you's got the rat under your seat, but you can check later. But rats are something that we're going to have to embrace more of as the climate warms. This is some work from Holly Harris, who's a young student at UC. She did this in her honours project last year. Up until 2010, no rats had been observed at Craigieburn. That's through all of those years of monitoring. If you know Craigieburn, up on the way to Arthur's Pass, no rats were observed. From 2007 to 2019, 310 rats were observed. Holly's done a whole bunch of models on this, and basically, if you combine a mild winter with lots of seedfall on the beach, you get lots of rats. At the Rakahuri, just up the road, Norway rats have been observed for the first time on the river for the last 2 years, I understand. So rats are a thing of the future in urban environments. This is some work from Susan Walker, which shows that you can you see the colours? So up north, it's more continuously ratty. Basically, tracking rates are more consistently above 0.6 rats observed per trap night kind of style thing. I think it's per 100 trap nights actually. And down here, mostly, you get the eruptive dynamics when seed falls. But as the climate warms, Susan's most recent models are suggesting that things will get more ratty. So we're going to see more rats. That's, of course, bad news. But there's something we can do about it. There's a wonderful city project going on. It involves predator-free Port Hills, and the Summit Road Society actually have a trap building workshop at Sumner at Redcliffe School this weekend if you want to go and have a look at that. So those predator control projects are going to be really crucial for dealing with, for making sure the tui continue to sing in Joseph's kowhai tree. Finally, what's going on here? This is actually the Waitākiri. It's probably not looking like this today. It's probably a heck of a lot greyer. But what's going on? There's a grey turbid channel coming down, and there's a clear spring channel, right? Is that what you're thinking? Good. This is sort of moderate flood conditions like you see lots of October and November. And I'm using this to represent that variety in the wild. And this is probably the hardest thing if we're going to really embrace the urban wild, is to get something that has variety in it. I'll tell you why. This is to do with braided rivers. And braided rivers are one of the most disturbed environments there is. They flood all the time, the channels move around, all of that sort of thing, right? Yeah. But yet they sustain these wonderful bird populations, and there's lots of productivity, under normal circumstances that they can find to feed there. So how does that happen? And we're pretty sure it's got to do with the variety of different habitats that they support, including these springs, which are driven by the changing of the channels. And so that they're stable, and they're the takeout bar for the birds when the rest of the channel's flooding. And if you look at, this is some work that Nixie Body did. If you look at, this is complicated, but you can handle it. The mean coefficient of variation, the proportion of fish assemblage native, fancy word for basically when those numbers are high there, you've got much higher proportions of the fish assemblage, which is made up of native fish. And so when you have lots of confluences, so the river's complicated, that would be high confluence heterogeneity, you get low variability in that. So you get more consistent native fish populations are able to exist in a complicated environment. Does that make sense? It's a complicated concept, but the more variety you have in nature, the more chances there are for things like refuges, recolonisation, and the chance for resilience. So, but that's a real challenge in an urban environment, right? Because in order for that to happen, you need to let things move around. We don't like the Avon River when it decides it wants to, flood Oxford Terrace or whatever it's doing today. We don't like when braided rivers move across the plains because they make things difficult for us. So, if we have resilient ecosystems, we do need to give them space to move. And so that's my third point. It's really important that we embrace the idea that dynamic is good, a variety in things is going to produce resilience, but that's going to involve space. And that's what we see on braided rivers. There's lots of pictures going on here, but we're going from small things to big things. And small things are living in different places, but the birds are moving across all those different places and can integrate across them. It's a very powerful resilience mechanism in ecology. So we need to deal with more unpredictability. We need to manipulate habitat characteristics we can. We're in for engineering. We've already engineered the planet. We need to engineer our cities. We need to actively manage predators, and we need to maintain those habitat dynamics. Kia ora koutou. Thanks very much for listening and for inviting me.
Kia ora, Angus. Thank you very much. I'd now like to invite Erik Pawson up to talk to you. Erik is a Professor Emeritus of Geography at the University of Canterbury. He also, amongst other things, chairs the Waitākiri Eco Sanctuary Trust. And here he is now. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's no coincidence that in this age of the Anthropocene, we're becoming more and more concerned about the fate of the wild, let alone the urban wild. There's a very nice little book written by two French historians called The Shock of the Anthropocene, and it has a number of quite shocking statistics in it. Now, if you imagine the combined biomass of all land-based vertebrates on Earth, then something like 1/3 of that biomass is accounted for by us. which is a fairly shocking statistic. The more shocking one to my mind is that the balance of the 2/3 is accounted for by our domestic animals, which is cattle, sheep, pigs, and dare I say it, cats and dogs. So that leaves about 3% of the combined biomass of land-based vertebrates for the 30,000 wild species. So I don't have the sort of ecological expertise that Angus has, but as a geographer I am very interested in how things connect, and I've got just a couple of slides to explore this in a little bit more detail. I think one of the great opportunities we've got in this city after the earthquake, I love Katie Pickle's little book that she wrote about 5 or 6 years ago, Christchurch Ruptures. What are the opportunities that arise from ruptures? And one of the big opportunities we have here is the Ōtākaro Avon River corridor that we used to call the residential red zone, which is well, you can see it is in orange on there. And the green bits around it are public reserve land. It's about 600 hectares that was cleared of housing between about 2012 and 2015. We have a regeneration plan for the Ōtākaro River corridor that was produced as the result of probably the city's most intensive process of public engagement in 2016, 2017. And that plan, amongst other things, allows for the revegetation of this corridor in wetlands and forested areas. And it also sets aside a number of particular parts outside that central revegetated zone. And so in the eastern reaches, the area is set aside for ecological restoration, and the plan specifically names also eco-sanctuary projects and eco-tourism projects. That's the area from roughly Burwood down to through Bexley to the estuary. So one of my interests in the red zone, since I retired a few years ago, that's really where I've focused my activities as a co-founder of the Ōtākaro Living Laboratory and the current chair of the Waitākiri Eco Sanctuary. And this is something that Angus was talking about. One of the most effective means of predator control we have on a small scale is fenced eco sanctuaries. This part of the world, the eastern coast of the South Island, is largely missing substantial fenced eco sanctuaries. So a real project that we could put in place here in and around the Burwood part of the red zone is a fenced eco sanctuary in which the 97% give something to the 3%. In other words, that we keep people at bay, but we particularly keep their cats and dogs at bay. And following on from what Angus was saying, we also keep their fellow travellers at bay, particularly the rats and the mice. And what you then do is create a haven in which you have a pest-free core from which birds like tui, bellbird, saddleback, kereroo can move out after fledging, and which acts as a creche for land-dwelling birds such as kiwi and for holding larger populations of geckos, skinks, tuatara, and rare plants. That's one particular vision. It's wonderful to hear that these things are being done on the Port Hills, but predator-free New Zealand programs generally only focus on a small range of predators. In a fenced eco-sanctuary, we're talking something like 10% of the red zone at most. Then you're talking about much more effective widespread control. What would this look like if we then put this into the context of the city as a whole? And this, I think, is quite important. This is a rather notional map, which I've drawn up myself. You'll probably find errors on it. But it's a map of blue-green corridors. What if we think of the city not as streets and pavements and houses, but as corridors of water and vegetation? Water is the blue, vegetation is the green. I say that because I gave this talk to a U3A group a few weeks ago, and somebody put their hands up and said, what's blue and what's green? In something like the red zone, then blue and green sort of acts together. The purpose of putting this map together is to show that we actually have quite extensive areas of blue-green corridors, and with a little bit of work, perhaps we can connect these much more effectively over time. And by over time, something like the Red Zone project, for instance, is intergenerational. It's not going to happen tomorrow. How about if we activate this network with something like my friend Colin Merck calls the beating heart of a protected eco-sanctuary? And Angus was talking about leaving space for rivers, but also for wild species to move out. And if we create these blue-green corridors and foster them and think about the city in this sort of way, then that's a real possibility. It seems to me, following through from some of the things Katie Pickles says in Christchurch Ruptures, we would then end up with a new kind of garden city. We lost a lot in the earthquakes, but we also stand to gain a lot if we think about real possibilities such as this. And the National Park City Foundation, you'll be aware that the press has been pushing this line for a while, talks about national park cities as cities where people and the wild are better connected. I thought Joseph put this a whole lot better when he talked about mana for the soul, which is a much more effective way of describing what the National Park City is on about. So I see real possibilities in thinking about the city as a network of corridors, what geographers call a network made up of the more than human, in which we consciously allow space for the 3%, which we as the 97% have almost squeezed off the map, as it were. Kia ora.
Thank you very much, Erik. I'd now like to invite our panellists to come up. You all know where you're sitting because we practiced this bit. Welcome to the stage Anthony Shadbolt, who's a landscape architect and biodiversity officer at Christchurch City Council. Craig Pauling, who you will know as a regional councillor. He's also specialises in ecology and environmental management. And Colin Merck, who's a landscape ecologist and research associate at Manaaki Whenua and also at the University of Canterbury, and a prolific advocate of all things to do with ecologically sensitive urbanism. And wonderful Di Lucas, who is a landscape architect, environmental planner, and a life member of the New Zealand Institute of Landscape Architects. And I'm just going to shuffle myself in now too. Check, that's off mute. Great. So I thought Joseph started on a very inspirational note, and we're just going to do a quick fire inspirational round to start us off. Right. Quick fire, I'm going to ask each of you to name one urban wild place in Ōtautahi and tell us what's great about it. Craig.
Does that work? Cool. Kia ora koutou. Ao tuatahi ka nui te mihi ki a koe aku whanaunga mō tō kōrero hohonu I tēnei pō. Tēnei te mihi hoki mō tō mahi I tēnei wāhi, tēnei whenua o Ngāi Tūāhuriri, tēnei te mihi ki a koe te rangatira. So just acknowledging Joseph for his awesome opening up for us and reminding us of some really important things to consider going forward. So thank you, Joseph. First of all, the first place that came to mind for me was the Ihutai, actually, which was on the map before. Avon Heathcote Estuary or something? But in particular, from Rapa Nui, Shag Rock, across to Karoro, the South Brighton Spit, and round into Te Kai or Te Karoro, into like Bridge River, anyway, the bridges into the Ōtākaro. And because that's really where I fell in love with nature, because I grew up in Aranui, and I used to go down there on my bike and hang out down there, and I just loved being able to pop over and see the ocean, the water coming in, also to see Ka Tiritiri o Te Moana, the Southern Alps behind, Te Pātaka o Rākau Hautu, Banks Peninsula, the Port Hills, straight across. Just everything about it spoke to me, so that was my first, and I'm going to have a second one because it's in my nature to be mischievous. The other one, because I moved to the other side of town as I became an adult and had a family, and my second one is Ōtūmatua, which is just a little hill above Horsell Quarry, but really significant to our whakapapa because it's a boundary marker between the Kemp's purchase of Canterbury and the Banks Peninsula purchases from Ngāi Tahu to the Crown. And but it's just an unassuming little hillock. It's not even a hill, really. But the quarry below it, Kennedy's Bush above it, I can see everything from there I need to see. When I go up there, I can see my relations at Kaiapoi, my whānau at Taumutu, across to Waihora, the Southern Alps again, the hills are right behind me. I just love it, so kia ora.
Kia ora, Frank. Hullen?
Kia ora koutou. And kia ora, Joseph. Thank you so much for your inspiration at the beginning. So I'm not going to cite Oroparoa Travers Wetland, which everyone might expect as my favourite wild place, because we're not allowed to mention one. So I'm going to say something a little unconventional here and talk about the rubble of the city, and particularly an area sort of on the corner of Manchester Street and Chewham Street, where nature is sort of succeeding back into a raw kind of rubbly environment. And it's a bit like Angus's braided rivers, actually, and there's some very rare native plants, such as the windgrass, which have sort of colonised those areas. And also there's a bracken fern growing up and a brick wall next to that have in a drip line off the roof, and of course there are little insects and birds that are feeding off those as well. So that's I'm sort of inspired by that, even though it's not everyone's cup of tea.
I'm going to take my friend's lead and have 1.5 sites. My favourite site is probably Te Wāku Kākatea, which means dense Kākatea forest, and it's a 10-hectare reserve on the Styx Pūhatakikiriri River. And I'll take my lead from what Joseph and Erik said about space. Space is really important. We need large spaces to have viable forest ecosystems, and the trees we planted in this forest, there's over 2,500 kākatea. They've been planted for about maybe 10 years, 11 years, and already fruiting, providing fruit, which will be eaten by kiriru, one day kaka, and you, yeah, absolutely. And when you walk through this forest, you feel better coming out the other side. It's got a lovely Styx solstice walkway running from one end to the other, but it's also wide enough to get off that walkway and actually into forest area that's been planted. Although it's been planted, it's not contrived, it's evolved almost spontaneously, and you feel like you're in the wild. And the other half side is the other end of the site, which is a Rongoa Māori site, so traditional Māori medicine. And that's probably the most special part because it has the people coming and interacting with the forest, learning about Rongoa Māori, traditional healing, and it's a very spiritual place. When you're there, you just feel that one with nature, and it's a lovely space. And if you haven't been there, it's 303 Radcliffe Road. It's worth a drive and a look, or a bike ride.
Kia ora, Di.
Thank you. Well, a colleague suggested I address my own place because I'm in the central city, and I will do that because I'm in a townhouse in central city, just 250 square metre site, and it's been really interesting. I've been 31 years there, but what you can have on a central city small lot. You know, I've got my guava kōwhai, I've got, you know, the whekiponga, we've got a lot of different, a titoki of fruiting, and the kereru arrive to feast on the kowhai. The skink came up the steps. So you can have a lot of nature, even in a very small urban central city site. And I've tried, you know, to work towards a zero runoff so that the water's all retained on site, a green roof, you know, it's a lot of different invertebrates. And, you know, it's interesting what we can do in this environment with not that much effort with local nature. Yeah.
I'd quite like to pick up, actually, Di, on what you said, and also maybe what Colin alluded to too, that idea that you can have wildness in small spaces as well as in big spaces. One of the things I'm wondering about is, Di, you have immense knowledge. Colin, you'll be able to identify things that, to me, they just look like weeds. So how do the rest of us embrace the urban wild in those little spaces?
A few decades ago, and after a public event, actually, it was Town Hall, then it was suggested by the Ōtautahi Gender 21 group. We got the community boards to contract us to do guides to what is natural to each part of the city. And so those guides people remember from the 90s. I grabbed one, haven't looked at it for a while, but we did a set of 4 different guides and people would go and get a sheet so that they could know what naturally belonged in their street, right on their place. And so we have now got that. Put it online, thank you. We've now put it on the City Council website. It was really nice, the council allowed us to do that. So you'll see that link at the top in the middle there. And so you can now go online and put your address in on that website, and it will come up with the plants that belong on your place, and it gives some idea of the staging and so on. And I'm adding another column on how you might use those plants. So we'll add that shortly. I've just been a bit too busy. So, yeah.
Michele, I think, you know, and I agree, having the knowledge to understand what is there is really important. But I've always sort of been really impatient, really, that's why I got involved in restoration a lot and mentored by Colin. Because I had this sort of thing that came to me, and it was that you can't love what doesn't exist. And because we were so starved of having this biodiversity around us, you know, there's real little knowledge in our city. So I'm like, let's get more of it, so more people interact with it, and more people then will become to understand it, because it's sort of like invisible at the moment. So I just like, let's get more of it, more spaces that it can grow in the rubble, more spaces that we're actively managing, like Angus said. So yeah, just more of it.
Are there particular ecosystems that any of you are especially worried about or would like to see prioritised in our city?
Well, okay.
Go, Colin.
Actually, could we have my slide 3? Because what I would like to mention is that, you know, we can fit a lot of nature into tiny spaces. And this is a 10 metre by 10 metre exhibit for the Ellerslie Flower Show a few years ago. And it's got all the kind of range of environments in that tiny little space. There's a little bit of bush, there's cracks in the footpath, there's lawns which have got made up totally of native species, there's a treatment train of water, and there's a green roof in the background and a trickle down and a rock garden. All of these things can contribute enormously to the very extremely rare native biodiversity that is our small herbaceous plants, as well as the big trees and the forests. Because, and this is the place where we can do it, because we can garden, we can manage, we can manipulate the environment to support these things in the tiniest of spaces. And they include the cracks in the footpath and in the walls, the stone walls, which have got lichens and mosses growing on them, and all the insects that feed off those, and so on. So, yeah.
Can I just say there's one problem though with that, Colin, when you do grow a front lawn forest, sometimes you get crazy visitors showing up at your house and scaring your wife when they look through the window and she's in her dressing gown. So that's happened a few times. Thanks, Colin.
I'm sorry we did that.
Wetland environments, which are chronically threatened throughout the country, particularly in Canterbury. They could be the size of Lake Ellesmere, Te Wahora. They could be the size of this stage here, but they all harbour really important biodiversity, and they're hugely threatened. The things we see every day are waterways and rivers in Christchurch, and they're probably one of the last vestiges of biodiversity. When we arrived as Europeans, we cleared pretty much everything. We cleared the land to grow houses and sheep and cows. We drained the land. We put the waterways into timber-sided drains and pipes, and we managed for one value for 150 years probably, Di.
Yeah.
But now we're managing for the 6 values, so drainage, landscape, ecology, recreation, culture and heritage. But that needs space, and we've got a great opportunity with the Ōtaukaro Avon River corridor. We've got 150 metres either side of the river, but other waterways like the Upper Styx River, Heezik and Avon, they're sandwiched between, potentially between houses. We've lost the boat on the Heezik and Avon, but the Pūhaere Kikinui Styx still has hope to actually get some good setbacks and good corridors to allow the river to do what it needs to do. The river needs to be able to decide for itself, within reason, how it evolves over time. And the bigger the reserves, the more sustainable and resilient those systems are. You get the full sequence of vegetation patterns from aquatic, riparian, harakeke, shrubland into tall forest. And I think that's what we need.
I think the upper Ōpau or upper Heathcote has, the retrospective work that the City Council has done with stormwater basins and wetlands and stuff. There's amazing stuff happening around where I live. The new Sutherlands Road area, massive wetlands being reconstructed. I say reconstructed because they were there in the past, of course. I think it's inspiring to see that, and it's awesome to have that, especially around where I live. I said to Michele and Jessica before, when we spoke about coming here, that if the things at the quarry hasn't developed and we have beautiful native forests there now, growing forests, all those stormwater basins hadn't been created, I don't know if I'd still live there, because I need that. I need that in my life. I need that there. I want the birds to come down to my house. I want to hear the korimako in the morning. So I really pay tribute to the work that has been done as well. And I think Christine Hedemeier was a person that had a hand in starting that, so pay tribute to her as well. And just it's actually, we're lucky too. We've done some good things, and we shouldn't forget that. Yeah.
Just thinking about climate change here, and thinking about perhaps needing to make room for, habitat retreat, other dynamic changes that might be generated by climate change. How do you do that in an urban environment when you think you've got hard boundaries, you've got roads, we've got sewage ponds, we've got all these other things?
Well, we've done it once already, of course, with the red zone that Erik had up in his, for a different purpose, but actually it's quite convenient actually, because the climate change issues going to probably prove that was a good thing to do in the end. So we actually have been through that as a community, and it was tough. My mum lived right there on the river, and it wasn't that she didn't want to move, but it was the community that was lost was the biggest thing. But we've actually done it, and we could do it again if we had to, I believe. Of course, it requires lots of money.
The red zone is brilliant in terms of addressing climate change. It was just 3 weeks before the February earthquake that it was signed off to be, it's flood prone, it will go under. And so it was so brave and good that it was red zone, and we need to design and plan for that transition. So rather than dryland ecosystems, we need to address the wetness that will increase there. Yeah.
So I think there's real hope that we can, yeah.
Could I just comment on that too?
Yeah, sure.
Could I have the slide 7, please? And just addressing Joseph's point about the densification of cities, which we know needs to happen for climate change purposes to reduce transport costs, et cetera, et cetera. But we need to compensate that with more green space so that the public may not have their quarter-acre section, but they have got easy access and close access to nature, because it's where the most people in the world live, in urban environments. So we need to, people need to be exposed and engaged with nature in order to understand it better, in order to address these other existential crises like climate change. If we understand the processes of nature, then we have a better understanding of why we need to change our behaviour.
So we'll just maybe throw to Jess, because she's giving me the eye, saying that there's definitely some questions from the floor.
Cool.
And I'm also really interested in the panel thinking about whether it would be possible for every person in Christchurch to live within walking distance of a wild space in a climate future.
There are so many questions, so apologies to those questions that we don't get to because we run out of time. There's great questions, so thank you all for the questions. One person asked, and I think this is relevant to what you've said already, is it better to provide multiple small wild spaces or large consolidated wilds? Do we want private gardens and parklets, or do we want these really big, expansive areas?
What a good question.
Both.
If we want viable wildlife populations, they need tens of thousands of hectares, so we can't do that in a city, but we can have a lot of smaller patches, 5 hectares, 20 hectares, and like Colin and Graham Hall wrote back in 2006 in their very good, excellent paper, providing that bush patch configuration across the city. We've got Travis Wetland, we've got Horseshoe Lake, we've got Tūāhuriri, Kakatea, Riccarton Bush, Stixmore Reserve. All these patches are distributed across the landscape. Trying to find areas of the small patches, 1.5 hectares, is really, really hard. But I think we can overcompensate by having the bigger patches even bigger again where we can. And we're sort of doing that, we're achieving that quite well. And I think the Council's urban regional parks network is a good example of getting those big forest patches across the landscape, and people can walk from their houses or bike to have a national park type experience without having to drive for 2 hours to get to Arthur's Pass. And I think that's really important too. So everybody from all means, economic means or time means, can actually experience nature on a daily basis, and high quality natural character too.
Jess?
Thank you. There have been. We want it all. Yeah, of course, we want it all. So one of the alls that people are asking about, and there's 2 questions relating to this, is, will citywide wildflowers on traffic islands and road verges contribute to biodiversity? What about grass verges? Council seems to be, the question is, why is council obsessed by grass verges to street edges? That's a lost opportunity, isn't it? So, are those going to be contributing spaces to our wildness and biodiversity?
I think this is a Di question. I think this is a landscape architect question.
No, I think that the verges and all of that can contribute hugely if we took a different approach to them.
What sort of approach do you
we
think,
can have
Di?
biodiversity and still have plenty of visibility and, safety and...
Get rid of the grass kind of thing.
Scruffy, yes. We've got to get scruffier, yeah.
These provide the corridors that link all of those patches together of different sizes. And they can be street trees. I mean, an individual tree is a habitat, for example. And as I mentioned, grass lawns can be native species as well, and they're feeding a whole lot of different little microfauna. So there's scope for incorporating all of these elements in our city and enriching it and making it a diverse place that does lots of different things and lots of moving parts.
But it takes different skills. Yeah. So you can't just send out the person with the lawnmower and the clippers. It takes quite different skills. We need to nurture skills in the city. I mean, I have a green lawn, all native species, but, I can spot different invaders and I can pull them out. But a lot of people wouldn't have a clue. And we got to get the skill, nurture the skills to manage this.
What I call this is ecological literacy, is raising the general knowledge and awareness and understanding of the whole community to understand the natural processes, how you practice kaitiakitanga or management for the benefit of nature.
There's actually
It increases people's empathy for nature as well. It increases people's empathy for nature. If they know about nature, then they'll be more inclined to be involved with nature and restore it, so you get healthy people and healthy ecosystems.
I've actually got an interesting story, but I won't say it. But how we got Tūāhuriri in the streets in Wigram through the Ngāi property development, working with the Runanga and others to really push to get them there. And actually Colin helped us because I got him involved to debate with the landscape architects who were designing that. And we managed to win those battles, but that was like a fluke in a way in the end because it was just happened to be right place, right time, right people, right knowledge, and we got there. But you know, we could do so much better, I think. Yeah.
This might be a good time to play a little video that we have. We have been talking to a group at Otago University who are developing a garden star rating scheme. So you've heard of the Green Star rating that you might a property developer might want their buildings to go through. Well, this is a garden star rating scheme. Certain Colin Merck was on the reference group, and we might just play that now.
Kia ora koutou. My name is Yolanda van Heezik, and I'm an urban ecologist at the University of Otago, and I have a particular interest in the biodiversity of private gardens. Private gardens vary hugely across the city, so you might call this one a low maintenance garden, and at the other end of the spectrum you get really big gardens like this. But most gardens are versions of this where you've got some lawn, a few shrubs, a tree, and maybe out the back a vegetable garden and some fruit trees. So gardens vary hugely in the amount of vegetation that they support, and these are two images just from different suburbs in Dunedin. And the vegetation volume is really a proxy for biodiversity because the more vegetation there is and the more diverse it is, then the more habitats and resources that it's providing for a whole range of other species. But of course, gardens are owned by a whole lot of individuals, and it's the decisions of those individuals which can have a huge impact on citywide biodiversity. And that's because gardens actually make up such a large area across the city. And in Dunedin, we've measured that vegetated garden area, and it's 30% of the total urban area. So that's more than the Parks and Reserves network. So citywide urban biodiversity is really vulnerable to this tyranny of small decisions made by individual property owners, but also by trends in housing development. So we're moving towards medium density residential developments, and you can, and this image actually shows one of those on the right and contrasts it nicely with the more traditional gardens on the left. So there's only a really small proportion of a medium density residential development that is green space, and so it's increasingly important to make those green spaces as biodiverse as possible. But at the same time, I think we also have to make our traditional gardens as biodiverse as possible, because they're increasingly going to comprise a smaller proportion of the total landscape. So they're going to play a more important role in supporting biodiversity. But how do you actually measure the biodiversity of a garden? Well, a group of us have come up with a scheme that we have called Garden Star. And Garden Star is a rating scheme that identifies features in a garden that are indicative of biodiversity, and it comes up with a score. And you can use that score to compare your garden to other gardens, but you can also use it as a means of identifying things that you can do to improve the biodiversity value in your garden. So there are a number of kind of broad level categories that contribute to that score, and one of them is the extent of permeable habitat. So here on the left-hand, in the left-hand image, you've got a property which has a really small proportion of permeable habitat. So permeable habitat is anywhere where vegetation can grow. And whereas the property on the right has a lot more. And you might say, well, you know, it's difficult for us to change that. And in some respects, that's correct. Excuse me, but there are decisions that we can make. And with respect to hard landscaping, so increasing hard landscaping is a common trend across our cities where permeable surfaces are being paved over. And so we can resist doing those kinds of things. Now, another category that contributes to the Garden Star score is habitat quality. And again, the house up, the property up on the left has got a rather poor quality garden. There's mostly lawn, there's a bit of hedge, a few small plants, if you compare it to that one on the right, which has much more vegetation volume. So when you're thinking about habitat quality and wanting to improve it, then you should sort of think in terms of layers. So starting with ground cover, there are features that you can incorporate, such as piles of rotting wood or leaf litter that really provide habitat for lots of invertebrates. And then when planting, thinking about, again, planting in layers to create vegetation volume that's very diverse and that's also dominated by native plants. And as well as that, removing pest species like the banana passion fruit that I have pictured there. Another component of the score is how you manage the habitat that you've got. And so you'll get points in, that contribute to your Garden Star score if you're engaged in activities like predator control, composting, or making habitats for wildlife like insect hotels or lizard gardens. And you'll lose points if you use a lot of pesticides or if you mow your lawn all the time. And that image on the right shows, I guess, what some people would consider to be a perfect lawn, but for all other species, it is pretty much a barren wasteland. And by mowing your lawn less often and allowing it to become a bit more weedy, then that does provide a lot more resources for a range of species. And you'll also gain some points if you keep your cat indoors, or if you create some small spaces that are a bit messy with long grass. Lizards love that. And if you attract native birds using sugar water, or even better, planting species that provide those resources. Thank you very much.
So we're all going to embrace messy gardens. Jessica's, I know we've got more questions than we can deal with.
We are totally overwhelmed. You superstars are so popular. So if we've got time, Michele.
Yep. We've got 10 minutes.
When thinking about climate change and increased wildfire risk, how do we balance the built and wild environments in cities in a way that doesn't increase risk further? Because let's not forget, we've experienced our own major wildfire in recent years.
I'm a trustee of land over at Rapaki in the village in the Kāinga there, and it's up on the hill above the village, and we're looking to reforest that land. And of course, some of the concerns that are coming from our whanaunga who live in the Kāinga is that, will increase the fire risk for them. And so, but again, I think it just all comes down to design and how you do it. We know there's low flammable native species as well. We know we can do fire breaks and put good gaps between houses or the edges of the forest and things like that. So look, it's all possible. I just think it's knowledge, just getting the right people on board and designing it well so that it can fit and work together. So yeah.
So that plant guide now has flammability on it. We added that column last year.
Another question, in anticipation of climate change, where some species will not be able to adapt, for example, increasing salinity, do panellists recommend strictly adhering to restoration using locally eco-sourced plants? Or because of climate change, do we need to think differently about what those are?
Salinity's a pretty good thing, really. We can grow trees anywhere from Avondale Bridge to Arthur's Pass, but we can't have coastal wetland and salt marsh anywhere but in those parts of Christchurch. So yeah, salt's a pretty good thing for us. Yep.
It's a bit of a complicated and controversial question, because we do generally want to plant eco-source species. We've heard a different perspective on that from Joseph too, on having a range of different varieties to get flowering and fruiting. But I think generally nature will adapt itself. We start off by providing the raw materials for nature to occupy the local environment, but as things heat or dry, or get more saline, then some of those species will kind of move to the edge in a way, and others will kind of start colonising from the north. I mean, there's many different issues, like, for example, maybe kauri would perform better down here without the kauri dieback, for example. It's a complicated question, I think. No simple answer.
But if we allow trying to get these connections, these linkages, so that there can be that migration as things dry and wet or salt. Yeah.
Eco-sourcing is definitely important. I mean, we've dealt with this at Te Ara Kakariki, which is a trust that Colin and I are both involved with out on the Selwyn district. And we had this debate early on about what do we do with the plantings that we're advocating. And so we actually got Colin and other ecologists together and said, well, what does it actually mean to be eco-sourced? And we came up with a geographical area where we'd accept seed from, which was actually very vast. It was between the Rangitata and the Hurinui River, actually, because you've got such little seed source on the Canterbury Plains anyway. You need to go that far to get it. So, but that's sort of definitely a foundational thing for those plantings. But you always have to be open, I think, to meaning as well. And I've always put a different edge on this debate around eco-sourcing, because I know my ancestors in particular brought things with them, especially kōwhai, especially karaka, and yeah, harakeke as well, and kumara, let's not forget that, which is an exotic. And so I think you always have to understand that there is those things that have happened over time, but they're done for a reason. So, sometimes meaning and reason can mean you'll plant a kauri tree somewhere because it's significant too. But yeah, you've got to be really conscious about those decisions, I reckon.
So I have a question for each panellist in turn. Just thinking about that intersection between biodiversity and the climate crisis. We're going to have a new council soon. What would you put at the top of the new council's agenda as an action to address that intersection point between the two?
I could start with this because I've already done it this term. Basically more funding for protection and restoration of spaces. It can be spaces, it could be land purchase, it could be doing stuff on council's own land better, as well as supporting community organisations that are already doing good work out there. So basically more rates from the budgets to support those activities. That's what I think. So just increasing those budgets more and more because it's so important. Yeah.
Okay, I think we need to establish a city that has greater emphasis on the well-being of nature, of the whenua, the land, and of the people, and to achieve a better kind relationship between them. And we need more nature. We need to compensate the densification by more accessible and visible public spaces that have got our own species in there, which generate that identity and that sense of connection to the land and to your place, and which enable us to kind of slow down and breathe and observe nature and learn from nature, and thereby have less emphasis on material wealth and more on sort of a more spiritual kind of connection to nature, to reduce our impact on the wider environment, to reduce our consumption of energy and material things that have to be mined from some other part of the planet, because we've really got to change our paradigm and slow down and reduce our impact on the environment.
That's a curious question for me as a council staffer, so I'm going to say what they said. But I think it's really empowering communities to actually take the ball in their own hands and do as much as they can and do it in a sustainable way. So we should be seeing the communities taking the lead in restoration and finding ways to actually help. I mean, there's 150 people in this room here, could all be out there doing some really great things, and you probably do. So you're supporting communities to do some really good work.
Yeah. I think that reviewing the way things are managed would be quite good. It could be helpful both by the councils, but also the developers the way they brief and want to manage these developments, because, you know, I'm on the urban design panel, and some of these things you think, oh, I don't think that's a good sustainable solution, but that's not in our, you know, we're not allowed to turn things down in that regard. You know, we could be trying to encourage, and how do people get educated in that? So getting that into a priority for the council, the sort of landscape management that would increase resilience and our moving forward into this world. Yeah.
Definitely using Joseph's words before, more mana for the soul, but that the thing about having those parks and places where people can go within 5 minutes walk of everybody's house, like those sort of goals that the city and the region could have, you know, that everybody, you know, I've always believed that, you know, having a korimako sing should be a right, actually, every morning. You know, you should be able to hear that every morning. If we don't do that, I feel like we're not doing our job properly. So that should be a goal of the city, in my opinion. So, you know, it feeds into maybe the national park city trying to sort of thing, just trying to push that more. Yeah.
I disagree with the name. National
Oh,
Parks.
same.
Totally disagree with it. We have a National Parks Act in New Zealand, and that is undermining that, and it is confusing for everybody.
We'll come up
And
with a new name for sure.
so, yeah.
Don't have a new name, but it has an important international connection, and it's turning something on its head. It's trying to be disruptive. That's what we need to do. We need to change our attitude and recognise that we all live within nature, and not to separate that nature is out of sight, out of mind for only a few privileged people. Anyway, debate to go.
A nature park would be a better term.
Good. Joseph, now.
Kia ora, just wanting to butt in here. So, a couple of things. Social disruptors. And folks, we're on the edge of a precipice. Necessity is the mother of invention. Innovation is its father. Okay? And so Andrew is talking about you all, 150 of you. There are numerous planting days available at Tūhaitara, at the Huria Reserve in Kaiapoi, in the Ōtākaro Red Zone in Christchurch. Colin talked about 100 square metres. You can, if you contact Tūhaitara, for instance, we will give you 100 square metres, 10 metres by 10 metres. You draw up a planting plan. We'll dig a scoop and create koaro mudfish habitat. You plant the plants, you tend the plants, and it is your mitigation against your carbon miles. It's 20 kilometres to drive from Christchurch out to Tūhaitara. But you can plant your kahikatea, you can plant your tōtara, you can plant your kōwhais, and you can take your children out there. And when your biota node is full, you can ask for another one and give it to the children. And so 100 metres, 100 metres, 100 metres, 100 metres, all of a sudden you've got a hectare. All of a sudden you've got a national park or a park. A biodiversity park. An Aotearoa park. Necessity is the mother of invention. Innovation is its father. The challenge is yours.
Oh, kia ora. And kia ora to all our panellists. That's all we've got time for tonight. Thank you all for joining the conversation. Let's continue it, but not on stage right now. I'm just going to shimmy my way over here and invite three lovely people to come up. Chris, Julia, Sharon. So this is always one of our personal favourite parts of the evening, where we invite people to just talk from their very personal experience about what they're doing. Julia, you're up first. It should be on.
Hello. Yeah, cool. Awesome. Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Ruapehu te maunga, ko Tongariro te awa, ko Rangatahi te marae, no taupo ahau, ko Julia Takaungawa, no reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora everyone, my name is Julia and it's a pleasure to be invited here today to talk about my journey in restoring biodiversity in Ōtautahi. So originally I was from Taupo and I moved down to Christchurch to explore the wilderness of the South Island, and I began studying at the University of Canterbury. Before I left my hometown, I was aware of the loss of species. However, it wasn't until I started studying and I became aware of the scale of the biodiversity crisis that was occurring and just how important biodiversity is. And that's when I began to take action. I began volunteering for Conservation Volunteers. They are an organisation that contribute to various restoration projects in different locations around Christchurch. Roles that I carried out were mulching, planting and releasing in all these different sites. And all these tasks were super heart pumping, so it made it worthwhile coming out on a frosty morning. Volunteering has become a regular occurrence for me. Every Friday over these past few years, visiting these restoration sites around Christchurch has opened me up to so many hidden gems that I never would have thought to explore on my own. Now I am learning about conservation practices in my university courses and seeing it carried out in practice. On our morning tea breaks, I would also learn insight about the area and its value from local perspectives, which always gave me extra meaning in these projects and why they are so important. And one of my most fond projects when I was volunteering was at Charlesworth Reserve Wetland. Here I was given the opportunity to carry out an invertebrate survey for the Estuary Trust. Through this project, I saw biodiversity at a whole new level. Not just from trees and shrubs, but all the little critters that all have their own role in the environment, that they are not even aware of that they're doing it. With the amount of biodiversity I found in one area, the restoration had only begun in 2002, so it just shows that people with passion, care and commitment can make such a huge difference to biodiversity in the area. Volunteering to help restore biodiversity around Christchurch has been extremely rewarding. From seeing the immediate results of 3 hours weeding to coming back a year later and seeing the results of a planting has truly been one of the best decisions I've ever made and has become a regular hobby. I have been regularly motivated through my university courses, learning about the benefits of continuing to enhance biodiversity, as well as meeting people and hearing their stories and knowledge that encourages me. Volunteering is extremely beneficial, as I get to be out in nature, which I often struggle to find time for when I'm studying. So by volunteering every Friday, I get 3 hours of my week to get outside, get my vitamin D, and take in my surroundings. Knowing that I'm doing my part to enhance biodiversity for the present and creating habitat for thousands of invertebrates for the future. Kia ora.
Tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Sharon and I'm here from an organisation called Flourish Kia Puawai to talk about one of our projects. This project happens on the King George V Reserve in St Martin's. We call it the Tiny Forest because we really need a new name for it. It's situated on the banks of the Opawaho or Heathcote River, and if you know the area at all, it's on the walkway between Ainslie Terrace and Riverlaw Terrace behind the St Martin's Scout Den. The Tiny Forest was planted for the sesquicentennial in 1990 under the leadership of Colin Merck, and Colin has retained his involvement with it in this current project. It's been described as one of the most established community-planted Indigenous riparian reserves along the river, comprising an ecological sequence from lowland wetland trees, shrubs and grasses to dryland species. So after 30 years, it's become a real treasure in the community, but it was needing a little bit of TLC. Now, Flourish Kia Puawai, of which I'm a part, is about responding to climate breakdown by enabling well-being, resilient and environmentally friendly lifestyles of our individuals, whānau and communities, and creating innovative, holistic solutions and to leverage sustainable, regenerative and environmental change. And so the key for us was really about finding a regenerative process to working in the tiny forest. Regeneration for us is about healing the whole community of life, not just conserving or restoring parts of it. It asks how humans can partner with nature to create fullness of health for nature and each other. So our focus is really about what can our community do in the tiny forest, but also what is the tiny forest doing for the community. I should say at this stage that the project leader is Mark Gibson, and he just lives and breathes this project. Unfortunately, he can't be here tonight for family reasons, and so I'm really speaking on behalf of others in the project. I'd also like to acknowledge, I understand there might be some volunteers from the project, and also pay my tribute to Maui Stewart, who has partnered with us to advise, guide, and really get involved in this project. So we kicked it off with, in 2020, we held a community event in the forest to celebrate its 30th birthday and to launch our project. And from this we started building a team of people and engaging with local community members who wanted to be part of it. Now my role is mainly backroom, and which is good because I don't actually live in the area, and this is all about local people looking after their local forest. So I provide advice, support, management, tick boxes, and we're doing this also as a action research process. So we're documenting how the project was developed and the processes we're using, and that will be a case study on regeneration for other communities to perhaps learn from some of our mistakes and what worked. So what does our project look like? When we first started talking about it, there were suggestions that we could just have a big clean up and planting day. You could advertise all over the cities for volunteers, maybe go to volunteer in Canterbury, get a team in, tidy it up, done and dusted, off home again, everybody feeling good about what they did. But that was not going to build an ongoing relationship, and we wanted to build that so that we had that kind of two-way process. So the two main streams of the project so far, Mark has built a team of volunteers from the local community who are becoming the kaitiaki or guardians, and they will take care, and they're developing their processes already on looking after the thing, keeping an eye on what's happening in there, organising watering and drought, things like that. And the other part that we've done so far is engaging the local school, St Martin's School, and working with the teachers. There is a group of students come down every couple of weeks, and they learn about various aspects of the forest and the river. And we talk not just about the biological things, but about spiritual things. Each session with the children starts with karakia, starts and finishes with karakia. We talk about how they feel about being in the forest and what they get from it, what they can do for the forest. It has been about engaging with the people in this place, creating the conditions for greater connection with this land. So as I say, the focus is not just on restoring the forest, but also looking at the connections. How does the forest sustain us physically, emotionally, spiritually? When we first asked the children about, we gave them a questionnaire on their first thing, and we wanted them to know that it's not a school test. You know, this is not about passing a test or anything. But some of the things we asked was, well, you know, how did you feel when you're in nature? And their responses was calm, relaxed, connected. How did you feel when the karakia was happening? Relaxed and peaceful. We look at how the forest sustains humans, and we had hoped to be able to also run a series of workshops or wānaka in the forest, looking at things like rongoa, looking at things like flax weaving, looking about how it could nurture your artistic endeavours. Unfortunately, COVID came along, and that's kind of put that on a back burner for a wee while, but we're getting there. So what have we learned from it? We've faced a lot of challenges, thinking about the best way forward in a way that stays true to our values. But this is what the research aspect is all about. The challenges I've particularly found for me was about relationship building, particularly with takata whenua, because building relationships takes time, and projects often have time constraints which are imposed by te ao Pākehā. Our dominant structures don't deal well with indefinite timelines and non-specific outcomes, which, when you're being responsive to nature and where people are at, is what we need. I'm pretty task-oriented, and that has been a big learning for me. Like many people, I get a feeling of accomplishment by starting and finishing a worthwhile task. But this project is about relationships and learnings as much as it is the tasks of weeding, planting, watering, or in my case, writing up, having project meetings, ticking the admin boxes and so on. So even though I'm not involved in the day-to-day mahi of being in the forest, planting and watering, I'm still learning about the need to go with the flow and allowing things to evolve naturally. I continue to look forward with the learning that I'll continue to do, and I hope the other participants, the volunteers, are having that same experience. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about that and the relationships with this very special tiny forest. Kia ora.
Kia ora tātou. Before I start, I'd like to say I'm not going to sing to you. Some of you might see that this is a music sheet. Recycled paper. My name's Chris Botur. I became involved with volunteer work on Ōtāmahua, Quail Island in 2017, a year after my wife. She had picked up a leaflet about the work of the Ōtāmahua Quail Island Ecological Restoration Trust on the island a year or two earlier. We both knew and loved the island for its quiet beauty, having been there a number of times with the children and by ourselves, and felt the trust work was a wonderful concept. The trust work involves the ecological restoration of the island to a pre-human state through replanting much of the island with native species, ongoing care, reintroduction of native animals, eradication of weed species, and monitoring and eradicating pests and predators. The latter has been achieved to some extent. There are now no rabbits, stoats, ferrets, feral cats, or hedgehogs, although there are still mice. Our work days are on the first and third Sunday of every month. It is, of course, seasonal work, and traditionally one day in August we get security clearance to enter Littleton Port with 2,000 plants. These are transferred to an ex-tugboat, and we and the rest of the gang are transported across to the island, where we offload them onto a trailer, and they are then driven to a nursery. But deer are quite a problem and have caused a pause in planting. They come across from Murapuku Point, a headland south of King Billy Island, at low tide. They love to feed on the new plants and strip bark off the well-grown trees. The Trust is awaiting a response from DOC regarding a cull on the island. We are usually part of a volunteer group of 6 or more under the leadership of the Trust chairman, Ian McClellan. There are some regular volunteers like ourselves, but others are occasional and sometimes come as a large group, such as a school group or tramping club. We meet at the wharf in Littleton at 9 or 10 o'clock, depending upon the sailings, and are ferried across to the island by Black Cat cruises. It takes about 10 minutes. We work until midday, break for half an hour, and then carry on until 2 p.m. or thereabouts. The ferry leaves at 3:30. Volunteer groups contribute more than 5,600 hours annually. The ground is prepared in advance for us to enable planting, and each of us plants 20 to 30 trees or shrubs in a day. These are a mixture of manuka, canuka, pittosporum, coprosma, lancewood, kowhai, flax, five fingers, and even silver tussock grass. Each plant is surrounded by a cardboard or plastic guard to shield it from the wind and the deer as much as possible. Aftercare of plants brings a frequent call for volunteers. We need to release the plants of encroaching weeds such as Scotch thistles or tall grass. This is done using long-handled shears, but prickles are often a surprise, even through gloves. The grass can reach chest height, and sometimes it's difficult to find the plants despite the pattern of planting. When the plants have grown sufficiently, the plastic combi guards need to be removed and possibly reused. Some guards will have blown away and will need to be found and replaced. Cardboard guards are more desirable because they can be left to rot. Perhaps the job most in demand is weeding through much of the island. We pull out the weeds, or if our strength fails us, we clip and use weed-specific poison. Scotch thistle can usually be dealt with using a grubber. Californian thistles are left untouched, as no ground attack can prevent their spread through an underground root system. Non-native broom and pine take much of our time, but we also search for and destroy macrocarpa, oak, ash, pig's ear, boneseed, hawthorn, spur valerian, and briar rose seedlings. No matter how thorough we are, pine and non-native broom reappear every year. What we are pleased to see reappearing are birds, such as native pigeons, keruru, grey warbler, riro, kingfisher, koatari, fantail, piwakawaka, bellbird, korimako, and silver eyes, tauho. Native bird numbers have increased as trees mature and provide more nesting sites and a more varied food source. Over the past 25 years, the Trust has planted over 103,000 trees. Native ground beetles, leaf-veined slugs, and the Aotearoa tree weta have been introduced to the island. We are proud to have been and continue to be a part of the shining example of ecological restoration. Ngā mihi.
Thank you very much, all three of you. We're now into the final phases of the event tonight. As is our tradition now, we are going to have a little creative contribution, and I'd like to invite Erik Kennedy to come up and introduce that for us.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ko Erik Kennedy aho. I'm the co-editor of a book called No Other Place to Stand, which is an anthology of climate change poetry from Aotearoa and the Pacific. 91 poets in this, so I know a lot of people who write about climate change. Therefore, I have the very agreeable task of curating a series of poets who are going to read one per event in 2022 at Christchurch Conversations. And it's really exciting to be able to bring the emotional expertise of artists to this alongside the other kinds of expertise that are already being brought into these dialogues about these vital issues. Our poet tonight is Gail Ingram. Her first book was called Content Under Pressure, Pūkeko Publications 2019, and her next book is called Anthology. And the Greek scholars among you will know that the literal meaning of anthology is a book of flowers. So this is a wide-ranging exploration of the flora of Aotearoa, including some of Ōtautahi's urban wildness. She cannot be here in person tonight because of COVID in her household, but she made a fantastic video of one of her poems, which you will now see.
The Lizard Man. 1. In times of crisis, there are those who dart about frantic, those who bury their head in the proverbial, and those in your backyard who do the heavy lifting, moving heaven. And 2. The Lizard Man observes the Puaseta, Carrick's Buchananai, and Tasia's new growth, orange fingers stretched in glee towards the giving sky. And he nods. The Lizard Man slashes boxthorn and weeds gorse. The Lizard Man picks out polystyrene pieces, bottle tops and foil packets left over from the specious development next to the Heezik River. He places them in his threatened single-use plastic bag each time he bow-legged walks the length of the track he built with his friend. The Lizard Man rubs his weather knee. The Lizard Man studies Muhlenbeckia astoni, Coprosma rotundifolia, and other complex berried shrubs on his ageing laptop. The Lizard Man plans a planting list for the grass skinks of Canterbury. He carries heavy stones to build homes. 3. The poet owns she holds the Lizard Man in her hand. For an instant, when she lifts the rock, a wriggle, a flash of nourishment for times to come.
Kia ora koutou, and thank you, Gail, thank you, Erik, for organising all of that for us. So a quick thank you for hanging on, because we've run so far over because you had so many questions and everyone's so engaged with this topic. Thank you all for joining us this evening. A huge thank you to all our speakers. Please thank them again. You have so greatly stimulated our thinking, our ambition, and I hope our action. Thank you to our supporters and partners, Christchurch City